Okay, good evening, everybody. Uh, Let me begin with introducing my colleague here, Charlie Cownie, and myself. Charlie is Director of Catholic Teacher Formation in the Lynch School of Education at Boston College, and I am Cristiano Cassalini. I'm an Associate Professor at the Lynch School um, and a Research Scholar at the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies, both at Boston College. At BC, I hold the endowed chair in Jesuit pedagogy and educational history. And uh, besides uh, uh, publishing and editing sources about this topic, I'm also the co-director with Charlie of the Master in Jesuit Education in a Global World. Let me give you a quick introduction to the agenda for today. Charlie and I will talk 20-25 minutes, and then we will open to the Q&A section. And at the end, Charlie will give us a glance to the program of our masters. For the Q&A section, if you have questions or comments, please type them in the chat or just raise the hand on the button and we will unmute you and allow you to pose your question. We want to thank the GASN for this opportunity, and particularly Catherine Stephens and Tim Sassen. Now, when organizing this series of events, and this one in particular, Charlie asked me to reflect upon how to engage the UAPs in a classroom from a historical diachronic perspective. At the first glance, the slide you see here looks like a very simple question. Where did this all come from? To be honest, I think that this question that sounds so simple is in fact the most difficult, challenging, but also the most meaningful for us as educators working in a Jesuit educational environment today. Oftentimes, we educators have to deal with principles and practices that come to us with the need for implementation. Sometimes we look at those principles and practices as an additional burden to our regular work, which we intend as the pedagogy, program, and schedule we produce within the context of a classroom, or if we are leaders of a school, within the context of an institution that has to cope with the network's demands. So the urgency we feel when dealing with such principles and practices is often connected to questions such as, is there anybody out there who can help me figure out in practical terms how I should implement this principle into my daily routine? What does this principle really mean? How can I turn this from the abstract inspirational terms in which it is put forward in an official document into a concrete program of action? In sum, it is a matter of economy, time, effectiveness. How can I align leading principles presented to me with my daily routine so that I can check a box in the ideal checklist of things and practices that make my school and my specific pedagogy a legitimate part of the network? My point is that by approaching such a conundrum through this feeling of urgency, we will remain behind the 8 ball with that principle. We will simply react to that principle. That is, we will confine ourselves in the role of passively receiving the message, however active we are when trying to figure out how to implement it. What I'm suggesting here, though, is turning this attitude into a proactive appropriation of such directions and principles. This appropriation being possible thanks to the diachronic vision of how these principles, and not others, have come to be so important, and why, and when. In a way, I believe that what Charlie asked me to do here today, his question, is also the answer. And a meaningful program, I believe, for any educator working in Jesuit environments today. Asking ourselves, where did this all come from, is actually the fundamental way to participate a living tradition, such as the living tradition of Jesuit education. Now, if you ask me, or if I try to figure out what is the origin of all this, what is the origin of the principles and practices that are pursued and implemented in Jesuit schools, higher ed, and other educational environments today, I would of course remind you about the IPP, and the most recent document on the living tradition of Jesuit school, I cannot but track this question back to what I think is one of the most Ignatian of things, that is companionship. I'm sure you're all acquainted with Ignatius's life and certainly with the spiritual exercises, one of the most important works of his life. During the 20th century, and particularly since the 60s, two huge events for the history of the Society of Jesus were, of course, Council Vatican II and the General Congregation 31, with the election of, as Superior General of Father Pedro Arrupe. The self-understanding of Jesuit education has emphasized the foundationality of two documents as pivotal for any institution, the spiritual exercises and the constitutions of the Society of Jesus. Of course, the need for this emphasis was generated by the great changes that Jesuit schools, colleges, universities, or any other educational initiatives had been undergoing. And the fact that the Ratio Studiorum, another monument that had been a hallmark of Jesuit education for centuries, was experiencing greater difficulties in adapting to the times. If the Ratio could not help, then which other sources could offer legitimate inspiration and directions, if not the spiritual exercises and the constitutions? Being that such documents are direct products, more or less in the case of the constitutions, of Ignatius himself, no wonder that the spiritual impact of his human cultural figure on the educational practices has been highlighted, perhaps at the expense of the story of his main creation, the broader companionship. In my view, when we look at the sources of the early Jesuits, the 10 companions of Ignatius back in Paris and then in Venice and then Rome, there is a clear indication that Ignatius was not a man working alone. The spiritual exercises themselves are not meant for someone alone. Ignatius was a team leader. He and the companions decided to stick together, and this companionship that kept loyal to each other, even when the initial plan to go to Jerusalem fell apart, became an institution. Ignatius was the leader of this bargaining institution, which he saw as his main achievement in this world. What I'm suggesting here is that the companionship that became an institution and thrived and lived throughout these 5 centuries is in fact the most Ignatian source of inspiration for what we do as educators today. This companionship, which if you read Superior General Sousa's letter about the UAPs, is extended to the companionship of the common brother and sisterhood of the people of God around the world, links also generations together. This is exactly the meaning of tradition, receiving and passing through generations, a mission, a principle, the foundation, and the institution itself. So in this sense, let me show it with the spiritual image. By participating in the tradition of the Society of Jesus, we are actually building Ignatius's vision together. Or by looking back at the developments of such a phenomenology, we can define moments of how Ignatius's idea of companionship has developed to be adapted to the times, remaining loyal to the initial companionship that he laid the foundation for. Think about St. Peter Faber, connected the goal of studies and spirituality. Bennett Pereira, an extremely important theologian at the Collegio Romano in the 16th century, outlined what a formative educator should be for the first time. Francesco Sacchini, a Jesuit in the 17th century, encouraged the teachers of today's middle schools by giving an example of how to practically create a joyful and engaging environment for students and teachers in a classroom. Giulio Aleni, a missionary in China who was the most prolific author in that country about how to raise a child. Joseph de Juvancy introduced the idea that teachers should have an additional training and coaching after their regular course of study and preparation to reinforce the fact that teaching is more than being a learned person. And that was in the 18th century. And again, Father Rotan, the Superior General, when the society was restored in the 19th century, emphasized the fact that it was important to deepen some content in the curriculum instead of losing our minds trying to teach little bites of everything. And again, Father Ledochowski, the Superior General, the first half of the 20th century, was the first one in the history, in the entire history of the Society of Jesus, to use the expression cura personalis, to mean the distinctive Jesuit care of students in our institutions. I will skip here examples of Father Rupe and on, because we are familiar with them, and they are so present to us. But these stories are stories of Jesuit companions in education that have proactively contributed to craft and bring to life the tradition of Ignatius. We can be like them. In a larger view, it has been groups of companions who have brought Ignatius's vision to life in new and adaptive ways. There have been crucial moments in this historical phenomenology, such as the development of the ratio. There has been a moment of educating indigenous people in the reductions of Paraguay, a moment of educating scientists and astronomers in China, a moment where Jesuit education was rediscovering the Thomistic reading of the world against secularized visions of society, a moment where themes of social justice and pedagogy of the oppressed have been brought onto the fore. And the moment when the cognitive, spiritual, holistic approach to the learning process and cyclical IPP paradigm, the experience, action, reflection, have become essential, and so on. Now, given the fact that Jesuit education cannot but be embedded into the main moments of the self-awareness of the Society of Jesus as a religious order, this story must also include the alignment of the Ministry of Education with the UAPs as they have been outlined in more recent times. If you read the most recent ones, you will see trends that maybe were not outlined 50 years ago, but still these major elements are resonating with the living tradition that they have emerged from to be meaningful and relevant today to the Society of Jesus and its apostolates. So reading diachronical the UAPs and its relevance for pedagogy in our classrooms today requires the work of understanding their roots, and understanding which can make us educators an active, creative part of that tradition. We are carriers and creators at the same time. We have a limited span of time to carry the tradition on, but nonetheless, we do our part in adapting this tradition to the needs of today. To steal from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, we are building Ignatius with our trembling hands. Or to quote from the prayer that was the homily that was recited at Archbishop Romero's funeral, I quote, "It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. We are prophets of the future, not our home." I thank you for listening, and I turn the microphone to Charlie. Charlie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cristiano. I will do my best now, as Cristiano has painted a beautiful picture of the history and tradition that has brought us to this current day. So then I turn to challenging all of us to say, how do we make this concrete? How do we make it real within our classrooms, within our schools? And so as hopefully any good Jesuit educator, at least I consider myself one, turn to prayer and critical reflection. If we are building Ignatius with our trembling hands, if we are stepping back and taking a long view, it has to begin with prayer and critical reflection. We have to be considering how we have engaged the UAPs in our classrooms. We have to think about how our schools have engaged in the UAPs. How have we been successful? Even more important, probably, how could we do more? And where do we go from here? These are the critical type of questions that undoubtedly your institutions are asking, that you certainly, if you're a classroom teacher, are asking yourself in your own classroom. But then it becomes, how do I actively engage in this? What Ignatian tools, what Jesuit tools are offered to us to do this? And certainly we have many. And so I'm going to do my best to try to explain how we might engage with one specific tool. the tool and the guidance given for apostolic planning from General Congregation 36. Apostolic planning, they considered essential to our movement forward, to our growth, to our carrying on the legacy. So we took and we adapted tools that they've created and looked at this apostolic planning viewpoint and said, how do we take this to a school perspective? So I'm going to now share with you. Please let me know in chat if this doesn't come through. I still, not being a digital native by any means, still struggle here and there. But I believe you just received a chat, a link to a document that is a planning document. I deal where my colleague deals with theory and history in broad and beautiful ways. I am certainly, as a teacher educator, one who looks at the minutia and the concrete of the practice. So then if we look at how we can engage in this, and if we adapt this apostolic planning tool and consider it within our own missions, at our own schools, in our own work, in our own classrooms, it really boils down to these three questions that have been laid out so beautifully. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how we will get there? When we think about that apostolic planning, it certainly, as I look at it and think about it, rings true the IPP. Certainly the context and the experience speak to the where are we now? We reflect on where do we want to be, and we plan that action, and we take action, and we evaluate along the way. So hopefully you see how these two models very much align with each other. So when we look at the where are we now, this, sorry, I'm just checking the chat box to see if anyone did not get the document I sent. It seems like everyone did. Apologize for the pause there. So if we are to look at where we are now, what are the steps we can? We begin, as we so often do, utilizing an examine, asking ourselves where our works have been inspired by God, how our efforts brought Ignatius's efforts to life, how our work is carrying on this mission, and we're asking for God's guidance. That idea of how we articulate our own mission, how we carry forward this mission through our educational ministry. And we consider our context. And when we speak about context, we certainly speak about the strengths, the gifts, the brilliances, everything we bring to bear within our work. But we also have to consider our weaknesses, our areas where we are challenged. And then we have to think about those internal and external, the term is harsh, but threats to our work. What are those barriers that we put up before ourselves and that happen outside of our initial individual locations, our classrooms, our schools, that are threats to us carrying out this educational ministry? In considering these aspects of examine, mission, context, we dig into this idea of where are we now? We're coming to understand our context of where we are, but also looking at what has happened within our classrooms, within our schools before today. We have to know where we are, where we have been, if we are to chart where we are headed. And as we consider where we want to be, we have to analyze based on where we are now, based on how we are doing. If our schools are challenged, if our classrooms are challenged, we have to include that in our analysis. We have to acknowledge who we are, where we are, and we also have to reflect on how we are gentle with ourselves, how we define our own success. Are we doing so in positive ways? Are we doing so in problematic ways? But that idea of success has to be concrete. And moving forward from that, we then choose those priorities that are before us within our work. What are the things we should be doing? The UAPs offer a great deal to us in reflecting on where we could be, where we should be on the margins with the vulnerable, sharing the faith, with those that either don't have it or haven't had the gift of digging into it in the ways that our schools and our educational ministry seeks. But where do these UAPs fit into our priorities? Where are we making the UAPs our objectives, our outcomes that we seek? We have to think about these objectives in very concrete, targeted ways, thinking about those specific things we need to achieve in order to carry out our priorities. How are we living out our identity as Jesuit educational institutions, as teachers in Jesuit schools, as leaders of Jesuit schools? How are our objectives aligning with this Jesuit identity? Who do we want to say we are, and who do we want others to say we are? We have to know, looking back one step, who they say we are right now, and we have to do so honestly and concretely. And then we reflect, we analyze, we figure out how we can chart that way forward. Knowing where we want to be and knowing where we are, knowing what's important to us, our priorities, what is at the heart of our mission. Through that, we then can start to imagine how we get there. And that's a real fun piece, the planning for action, setting a plan of action for yourselves, for your work, with your colleagues, with your students, with your parents or guardians that are in your communities. How are they engaged in defining this work? What is our timeline for achieving this work? What are we seeking? What resources? This is a concrete aspect. We can't think nothing of it, but space, time, money, buy-in from the community, the people involved, the skills that we need, the strengths we need to have and cultivate in our community so that we can carry out these objectives. These are essential pieces to the work. We must also monitor and figure out and put in place the systems, the structures that we need to make sure that we are monitoring as we move forward towards our objectives. How will we hold ourselves and our community accountable for this implementation? Again, what will success look like when we achieve it? Will this be a community that Jesus would himself recognize here on earth? We hope it is, but we need to make concrete what that success will look like in our everyday strategies, ideas, the things that are happening in our schools, in our classrooms, the conversations that we will be having with students, the conversations that students will have amongst themselves. We need to set and chart that course for success. We also have to be aware that context changes. Needs, priorities have to adjust. How do we build into an action plan to reach concrete objectives that are mission-centered at the heart, speak to the heart of our ministries? How do we plan to know that we may need to pivot? We may face a pandemic and we need to pivot and still carry out and reach towards our objectives. And then, of course, and this is essential at every level, it applies to all stages of this process, but we need to be thinking about how we communicate. We need to think about how we're engaging our members of our community in the process, throughout the process, in setting up those that will be heard, those that will have a place in our community, and their voices will be carried and raised up and given priority and privilege in our community. That all speaks to our communication of this. How we communicate the plan, the vision, the objectives that come out of this work. And then, how will we share our success? This will speak to recruitment. This will speak to fundraising. This will speak to the pride within your community and the knowledge in your community that you are reaching towards something greater. Now, this is one model, certainly, of how you might engage the UAPs in concrete ways, in a concrete manner that has both flexibility in doing the work, but also sets it up in a concrete enough manner so that it allows your community to actively engage and know what is our process and how can we be engaged within it. And with that, I want to pause the conversation. My colleague Cristiano has set the stage beautifully with a tremendous philosophical and historic perspective. And then hopefully I've been able to offer you a concrete tool of engaging the UAPs within your community, engaging in this work of the formation of global citizen, of men and women for and with others. So we want to then open up for any questions, and we are able to take questions either if folks raise their hands, their digital hand, if you will, and then you'll be able to speak once we call upon you, or you can submit a question through the Q&A system that should be showing up right on your screen there. And I'll even throw in, if you'd prefer, please feel free to also send in a chat question. I'm trying my best for my best teacher pause while acknowledging that it is after 7:30 on a day in which I'm sure everyone has been teaching and working very hard. That's my best effort at stalling there. We also want to make sure we acknowledge that this isn't a conversation that simply can happen within 30 minutes on a Thursday night towards the end of the school year. My hope for you is that we are engaging and stirring your thoughts in this process of what will be for the years to come as well. And then also to, of course, I'll offer myself and my colleague Cristiano, but offer us as resources. You have our emails now, you have our contact information, and we want to be a part of the work out there being done. So please feel free also to reach out at any point, and we're happy to engage in this. We also have sessions. I think all of you on are aware that we have sessions next week is going to look at, it's really a DEI type session, diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at the role of equity and inclusion along with global citizenship. And then the following week, we have a Care for the Caretaker session led by a wonderful member of our team who is also a clinical psychologist. And he'll be pulling together, well, he's already done it, but he'll be sharing with all of you skills and tools from the Jesuit tradition that also allow you to care for yourselves and your colleagues at the same time. I am going to share my screen one last time in order to just share briefly. We also have at Boston College a master's degree that is focused specifically on Jesuit education in a global world. It is a fully online degree. Can be completed in 18 months, or and we have one of our first cohort of students that is going to finish it faster than that. But also we have individuals that are laying it out to be closer to probably 3 years, given the context of full-time work. So we have great flexibility there. And we also want to make sure that you understand that the application we try to make very easy, and we try to work with individual schools and members to do everything we can to keep the costs down so that it is accessible to educators. But the list, the website is there, bc.edu/Jesuit-teacher-education. Though this degree does and is applicable for both individuals that are classroom teachers and individuals that are in leadership positions, as you can tailor the degree quite a bit towards your area of focus and interest yourselves. And with that, I want to say thank you. I will also say I've included myself. If you have any complaints or thoughts about how we can continue to improve or meet your needs in content, please feel free to email me. If you have compliments for my colleague Cristiano, you can send those my way and I'll forward those along to him as well. But we want to thank all of you for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next week or sometime in the future. Thank you very much. Cristiano.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.